The transport ship Celestial Dawn hummed through the void between star systems, carrying diplomats, traders, and researchers from dozens of different species. In the common area, conversations buzzed in multiple languages while holographic displays showed news from across the galaxy. The ship represented everything the Galactic Coalition stood for: unity, cooperation, and peaceful coexistence among the stars. Marcus Chen sat alone at a corner table, quietly reading from a small tablet while sipping synthetic coffee. His plain, gray jumpsuit marked him as low-priority passenger cargo, probably some minor functionary heading to a backwater station. The other passengers barely noticed him, which was exactly how Marcus preferred it. At the central table, a group of Veltar warriors dominated the conversation. Their blue-scaled skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and their forearms gestured dramatically as they shared stories of their latest military campaigns. Commander Zethkar, the largest among them, had been regaling his audience for over an hour with tales of conquest and glory. "The humans," Zethkar said, with a dismissive wave of his upper right arm. "They claim to be warriors, but look at them. Soft, weak, barely worth the metals in their ships." His yellow eyes swept the room contemptuously. "They hide behind their technology and call it strength." Several other passengers nodded in agreement. The Karathi delegation, with their crystalline exoskeletons, clicked their approval. Even the usually diplomatic Etherians seemed to find the human bashing amusing, their translucent forms shimmering with what passed for laughter among their kind. "I heard," added Sub-Commander Velthara, Zethkar's second, "that human soldiers actually suffer from something called trauma after battles. Can you imagine? Warriors who break from fighting?" The table erupted in harsh laughter. Marcus continued reading, his expression unchanged. To any observer, he appeared completely absorbed in his tablet, oblivious to the conversation mere meters away. His breathing remained steady, his posture relaxed. Years of training had taught him to control every micro-expression, every involuntary response that might give away his true nature. "They're particularly pathetic in close combat," Zethkar continued, warming to his subject. "No natural weapons, no armored skin, no enhanced strength. They have to wrap themselves in metal suits just to survive what any proper warrior handles with bare claws." He flexed his own razor-sharp talons for emphasis. A young Veltar warrior, eager to impress his commander, leaned forward. "Commander, didn't you once face human soldiers on Kepler 442? Zethkar's chest swelled with pride. "Indeed, young Korthal. 12 human Marines thought they could hold a strategic outpost against my assault squad. It was over in minutes. They fought like frightened children crying for their mothers as we cut them down." He paused dramatically. "Though I will admit they died with more courage than I expected. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless." Marcus's finger stopped scrolling. For just a moment, the smallest tension appeared in his jaw before disappearing entirely. He reached for his coffee with perfectly steady hands and took another sip. Kepler 442. He knew that engagement. He knew those 12 Marines. He had been their sergeant. The funniest part, Zethkar continued, was their leader, a small human, probably their equivalent of a sub-commander. He actually challenged me to single combat while his men lay dying around him. Can you imagine the arrogance? The Veltar warrior laughed, a sound like grinding metal. I respected his spirit enough to make his death quick. The coffee cup didn't shake in Marcus's hand, though the ceramic should have cracked under the pressure of his grip. His breathing didn't change, his posture didn't shift. But something, deep in his chest, something that had been dormant for 3 years, began to stir. The thing he had buried on a dozen worlds, the part of himself he had tried to leave behind when he accepted this assignment. "These humans," said Velthara, "they give their warriors such dramatic names. That sergeant called himself something ridiculous right before the commander killed him. What was it? The Grim something?" "The Reaper," Zethkar corrected with amusement. "He said his name was Reaper, as if that would frighten me, as if a soft human could be death incarnate." The entire table dissolved into laughter again. Marcus closed his tablet with deliberate care and placed it on the table. He picked up his coffee cup and drained it completely. then set it down with barely a sound. When he finally looked up, his brown eyes swept the common area with the methodical precision of someone conducting a threat assessment. The laughter at the central table continued, but a few of the more perceptive passengers had begun to notice the human in the corner. There was something different about his stillness now, something that made their instincts whisper warnings. The Etherean diplomat found herself unconsciously shifting away from Marcus's line of sight. A Karathi trader's crystalline structure began to dim as his natural defenses activated. Marcus stood with fluid economy of movement and walked to the recycling port to dispose of his cup. Every step was perfectly measured, perfectly controlled. He moved like someone who had trained for thousands of hours to make violence look effortless. But still no one really noticed. Humans were soft, after all. Weak. Harmless. As he passed near the central table, Zethkar glanced up at him with casual contempt. "You see?" the commander said to his audience, not bothering to lower his voice. "Look at this one. Probably runs at the first sign of conflict. Typical human coward." Marcus paused beside their table. For a heartbeat, something flickered across his features. Not anger, not rage, but something far colder and infinitely more dangerous. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational. "Sergeant Marcus Chen, Terran Colonial Marines, 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion." The words fell into the sudden silence, like stones into still water. Though most people knew me by my call sign, he met Zethkar's suddenly uncertain gaze with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. They called me Reaper. The common area had gone completely silent. Even the ship's background hum seemed muted as every passenger turned to stare at the unremarkable human who had just claimed to be a ghost. Marcus smiled then, and it was perhaps the most terrifying expression any of them had ever seen. It held no malice, no fury, just the absolute certainty of someone who had looked death in the face so many times that they had become intimately acquainted. "Enjoy your stories, Commander," Marcus said pleasantly. "I'll be interested to hear how they change by the time we reach our destination." He walked away without another word, leaving behind a table of warriors who suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the quiet species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The silence in the common area stretched for nearly a full minute after Marcus disappeared down the corridor toward the passenger quarters. Commander Zethkar stared at the empty space where the human had stood, his forearms frozen in mid-gesture. The confident smile had vanished from his scaled features, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like uncertainty. "He's lying," Velthara said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Humans lie constantly. It's one of their few talents. "Of course he's lying," Zethkar agreed, though he couldn't quite shake the memory of those cold brown eyes. "The Reaper died on Kepler 442. I killed him myself." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept into his mind like poison through a wound. The Etherean diplomat, Luminara, flickered between visible and translucent as her species did when deeply troubled. "Commander," she said carefully, "are you certain you killed the human leader?" "Absolutely certain?" Zethkar's head snapped toward her, yellow eyes flashing with irritation. "Are you questioning my word, Etherean? I drove my blade through his chest myself. No human could survive such a wound." But even as he spoke, fragments of that battle replayed in his mind. The human outpost had been small, lightly defended, an easy target for his assault squad. 12 Marines against 30 Veltar warriors should have been a massacre, and it was, just not the massacre he had expected. The humans had fought with a desperation that bordered on fanatical. They had used every piece of cover, every tactical advantage, every dirty trick in their arsenal. What should have taken minutes had stretched into hours. By the time his forces had finally breached the inner defenses, half his squad was dead or wounded, and then there had been the sergeant. Zethkar had found him in the command center, standing over the bodies of 3 Veltar warriors who had somehow made it past the outer defenses. The human's armor was cracked and bloodied, his weapon nearly depleted, but he stood as steady as a statue. When Zethkar had entered, the sergeant had simply turned to face him with those same cold, calculating eyes. "Reaper," the human had said, as if introducing himself at a social gathering rather than preparing to die. "Sergeant Marcus Chen, but my friends call me Reaper." The fight that followed had been unlike anything Zethkar had experienced. The human moved like flowing water, like controlled violence given form. Despite his smaller size and lack of natural weapons, he had nearly won. Nearly. In the end, Veltar's strength and reach had prevailed, and Zethkar's blade had found its mark. Or had it? The more Zethkar thought about it, the more details seemed fuzzy. The human had fallen, yes, but had he checked for vital signs? Had he verified the kill? The memory seemed strangely incomplete, like trying to recall a dream upon waking. "I need to access the ship's passenger manifest," he announced suddenly, rising from his seat. "Commander?" Velthara looked confused. "That human. I want to know exactly who he is." Zethkar's voice carried an edge of command that brooked no argument. "If he's using the name of a dead warrior, I want proof." The walk to the ship's information terminal felt longer than it should have. Other passengers watched the Veltar commander pass with nervous glances, sensing the tension that radiated from his frame. The casual confidence that had marked his earlier stories was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. The terminal accepted his diplomatic credentials and displayed the passenger manifest with clinical efficiency. Zethkar scrolled through the list until he found what he was looking for. Chen, Marcus. Age 34. Occupation, Cultural Attaché, Human Diplomatic Corps. Previous military service, Terran Colonial Marines. 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion, honorably discharged. Security clearance classified. Special notes. Medical discharge following presumed KIA on Kepler 442. Revived status confirmed by Terran Command. The blood drained from Zethkar's face as he read the entry 3 times, each reading confirming what he desperately hoped was a mistake. Presumed KIA revived status. The words swam before his eyes as the implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. He hadn't killed the Reaper. Somehow, impossibly, the human had survived, sir. A voice behind him made Zethkar spin around. A junior crew member, some 4-armed species he didn't recognize, was looking at him with concern. "Are you all right?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost. The irony would have been amusing under different circumstances. "I need to send a priority message to Veltar Command," Zethkar said, his voice hoarse. Immediately, the crew member looked uncertain. "Sir, I'm not authorized to approve priority communications without—" "This is a matter of galactic security," Zethkar snapped. "There is a human aboard this ship who poses a significant threat to Coalition stability. I need to warn my superiors before—" "Before what, Commander?" The voice came from directly behind him, quiet and conversational. Zethkar spun around to find Marcus Chen standing less than 2 meters away, close enough to strike before the Veltar could react. The human held a small datapad in one hand and seemed to be reading something with casual interest. "Interesting passenger manifest," Marcus observed, not looking up from his pad. "I particularly enjoyed my own entry. Presumed KIA always makes me smile. It's such an optimistic phrase, don't you think?" Zethakar's hand moved instinctively toward the ceremonial blade at his side, but stopped when Marcus finally looked up. Those brown eyes held no threat, no violence, which somehow made them infinitely more terrifying. "You survived," Zethkar whispered. "Barely," Marcus acknowledged with a slight nod. "Your blade missed my heart by less than a centimeter. Punctured lung, internal bleeding, massive trauma. The medic said I was clinically dead for almost 4 minutes." He tilted his head slightly, studying Zethkar's pale features. "But humans are remarkably difficult to kill permanently. We have this annoying habit of coming back from the dead." The crew member had backed away slowly, sensing the dangerous currents flowing between the 2 warriors. Other passengers in the vicinity began to notice the confrontation, creating a widening circle of empty space around the terminal. "What do you want?" Zethkar asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Originally, to finish my mission and retire to a nice quiet planet somewhere warm, maybe take up fishing." He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "But then I heard some very interesting stories about a Veltar commander who likes to boast about his victories. Stories about brave human Marines who died protecting their post. Stories about a sergeant who challenged you to single combat." "It was war," Zethkar said defensively. "They were enemy combatants." "Yes, they were," Marcus agreed easily. "Good Marines, all of them. They followed their orders, held their position, and died doing their duty. Nothing wrong with that." His voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "What bothers me is the embellishment, the lies, the way you've turned their sacrifice into entertainment for your friends. Zethkar felt his secondary heart begin to race as understanding dawned. "What are you planning?" Marcus smiled again. That same terrifying expression of absolute certainty. "Planning? Commander, I'm a cultural attaché now. I don't plan military operations anymore." He gestured around the passenger area with his datapad. "But I do study cultures, behavioral patterns, social dynamics. It's fascinating how quickly stories change when people discover they might have to back them up with action." "Are you threatening me?" Zethkar's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Not at all," Marcus replied mildly. "I'm simply curious to see how your stories evolve now that you know your audience includes the subject matter." He tucked his datapad away and took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Zethkar could hear. "By the way, Commander, my friends back on Kepler 442, they had families, children, people who still believe their fathers and sons died as heroes." His brown eyes seemed to bore straight through the Veltar's skull. "I'd hate for those families to learn their loved ones were being mocked by the alien who killed them." Without another word, Marcus turned and walked away, leaving Zethkar alone with the growing realization that this journey had just become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Word spread through the ship faster than a reactor breach. By evening, every passenger knew that the quiet human in the corner claimed to be the legendary Reaper, and that Commander Zethkar's confident stories had suddenly become much more complicated. The common area, which had buzzed with conversation and laughter that morning, now felt tense and subdued. Marcus maintained his usual routine as if nothing had changed. He ate his meals alone, read his tablet in the observation lounge, and nodded politely to other passengers when their paths crossed. To anyone watching, he seemed completely unaffected by the storm of whispers and speculation swirling around him. But those who looked closely might have noticed that he always positioned himself with clear sightlines to all exits, and that his hands never strayed far from objects that could be weaponized in an emergency. The Veltar delegation had claimed a corner booth in the ship's bar, their usual boisterous demeanor replaced by hushed, urgent conversations. Zethkar sat at the center of the group, his yellow eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting an attack. The other warriors looked to him for guidance, but for the first time in years the commander seemed uncertain about his next move. "Sir," Velthara whispered, leaning close to her commander's ear, "the crew is starting to ask questions. If this human really is who he claims to be, perhaps we should request additional security measures." Zethkar's laugh was bitter. "Security measures against the Reaper?" He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand, Velthara. I've been researching human military records since this afternoon. The Reaper isn't just some soldier with a dramatic nickname. He's a legend, a ghost story that enemy forces whisper about in the dark." The younger Veltar warriors exchanged nervous glances. "Surely human propaganda is exaggerated," one of them suggested hopefully. "Is it?" Zethkar pulled up a holographic display from his personal datapad, showing a series of military records and after-action reports. Operation Nightfall. A single human operative infiltrated a Krex mining facility and eliminated 37 guards without raising an alarm. Operation Silent Thunder. Enemy communications went dark across an entire sector, and they found bodies for weeks afterward. Each one with a small mark carved into their armor. A scythe. The display showed dozens of similar reports, each one detailing impossible missions accomplished by a lone human operative. Hardened warriors found dead in sealed bunkers. Assassination. Targets eliminated despite being surrounded by loyal guards. Enemy officers who simply vanished from their own command centers, leaving behind only that distinctive mark. The Reaper was the Coalition's most effective special operations asset for over 7 years. Zethkar continued, his voice growing quieter with each word. He specialized in missions where conventional forces would fail: deep infiltration, targeted elimination, psychological warfare. And according to these records, he never failed a mission. Not once. Velthara studied the reports with growing unease. "But you killed him on Kepler 442. You said." "I thought I killed him," Zethkar corrected sharply. "Apparently I was wrong." He gestured toward the displays showing medical records. "The humans have technology we don't fully understand. Nanomedical systems, genetic therapy, cellular regeneration techniques that border on miraculous. They can bring back someone who was clinically dead for several minutes. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the Reaper had survived, if he was truly aboard this ship, then every passenger was potentially in danger. The human who had sat quietly reading his tablet for 2 days wasn't a harmless diplomat. He was a weapon of unprecedented lethality. "What does he want?" asked Korthal, the youngest of their group. Before Zethkar could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. "That's an excellent question." The Veltar warriors spun around to find Marcus Chen standing beside their booth, a drink in one hand and his ever-present datapad in the other. None of them had seen or heard him approach, despite their enhanced senses and military training. He had simply appeared like a shadow-given form. "May I join you?" Marcus asked politely, as if requesting permission to sit at a cafe rather than confronting a table full of armed alien warriors. Zethkar's hand moved toward his weapon, then stopped as he remembered where they were. The ship operated under strict coalition law. Violence between passengers was grounds for immediate spacing. But more importantly, he was beginning to understand that if the Reaper wanted him dead, no amount of security or weapons would make a difference. "Please," Zethkar said carefully, gesturing to an empty seat. Marcus slid into the booth with fluid grace, placing his drink on the table with barely a sound. For a moment, he simply sat there, studying each Veltar face with the methodical attention of someone conducting a threat assessment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no hostility, no anger, just casual curiosity. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," he said, addressing Zethkar directly. "About Kepler 442 and the stories you've been telling. I realized there might be some confusion about what actually happened that day." Zethkar felt his throat constrict. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a sip of his drink before responding. "Well, you've been describing the engagement as a glorious victory against inferior human forces, and from your perspective, I suppose it was. You completed your objective, captured the outpost, and eliminated all resistance." He paused, his brown eyes reflecting the booth's ambient lighting. "But you might be interested to know what the mission really was." The Veltar warriors leaned forward despite themselves, drawn in by the quiet authority in Marcus's voice. "Kepler 442 wasn't just a random outpost," Marcus continued. "It was a listening station, monitoring Veltar fleet movements in the outer systems. My team wasn't there to hold the position indefinitely. We were there to delay your assault long enough for the station's AI to complete a data upload to Coalition Command." Understanding dawned slowly on Zethkar's features. You let us capture the outpost?" "Let you? No. That gives you too little credit. You fought well, used superior numbers effectively, and ultimately won the engagement." Marcus's expression remained neutral. "But the mission wasn't to prevent you from taking the station. It was to keep you busy for 6 hours while terabytes of classified intelligence data were transmitted to the Coalition fleet." Belthara's mandibles clicked nervously. "How long did we take to secure the outpost?" 6 hours and 17 minutes, Marcus replied without hesitation. 17 minutes longer than necessary, actually. My team performed better than expected. He raised his glass in a mock toast. "Those 12 Marines you killed? They died knowing they had accomplished their mission perfectly. Every minute they held you back was another gigabyte of fleet positions, supply routes, and tactical assessments transmitted to Coalition Command." The silence that followed was deafening. Zethkar stared at the human across from him, finally understanding the true scope of what had happened on Kepler 442. They hadn't won a glorious victory. They had walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. The Reaper and his team had sacrificed themselves not in desperate defiance but as part of a calculated strategy. "That intelligence," Zethkar said slowly, "it was used in the Battle of Rigel Nebula." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Very good. Yes, the data my team transmitted allowed the Coalition fleet to predict your movements with remarkable accuracy. The battle that should have been a Veltar victory turned into a stalemate, which ultimately led to the current peace accords. The implications crashed over the Veltar warriors like a tsunami. Thousands of their people had died in that battle because of intelligence gathered at the cost of 12 human lives. The strategic brilliance was undeniable and absolutely terrifying. "So you see," Marcus continued conversationally, "when I hear stories about those Marines being portrayed as cowards who died crying for their mothers, it strikes me as somewhat inaccurate. They were professional soldiers who completed an impossible mission under overwhelming odds." His voice grew very quiet, very dangerous. "They deserve better stories." Zethkar met those cold brown eyes and finally understood exactly what kind of creature he was dealing with. This wasn't just a skilled soldier or even a legendary operative. This was something far more dangerous, a human who combined lethal capability with absolute moral conviction. "What do you want from me?" the commander asked. Marcus finished his drink and stood up, preparing to leave. "I want you to tell better stories, Commander. Stories that honor the dead instead of mocking them. Think you can manage that?" Without waiting for an answer, the Reaper walked away, leaving behind a table of warriors who suddenly felt very small and very mortal. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Marcus was reviewing diplomatic protocols in the observation lounge when his tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender identification made his eyebrows rise slightly. "Admiral Sarah Rodriguez, Coalition Special Operations Command. Eyes only. Classification: Omega Agent Chen. Intelligence indicates possible Veltar extremist cell aboard your vessel. Commander Zethkar may be affiliated with separatist movement seeking to undermine peace accords. Primary target: Etherian diplomatic delegation. Recommend immediate assessment and containment if necessary. Rules of engagement: authorized for any action necessary to protect coalition assets." Rodriguez Marcus read the message twice, then deleted it from his tablet's memory. He leaned back in his chair and considered the new information carefully. Zethkar as an extremist operative made a disturbing amount of sense. The commander's casual dismissal of human capabilities, his detailed knowledge of military engagements, his presence on a ship carrying high-value diplomatic targets, it all fit the profile. But there was a problem. Marcus's cover as a cultural attaché would be blown the moment he took any overt action, and despite his personal feelings about Zethkar's stories, he had no concrete evidence of terrorist activity. Suspicion wasn't enough to justify the kind of intervention Admiral Rodriguez was requesting. He was still pondering the situation when an explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered, emergency klaxons began wailing, and the artificial gravity fluctuated for several terrifying seconds. Marcus was on his feet instantly, his diplomatic persona vanishing like smoke as years of combat training took over. He moved toward the nearest information terminal with the fluid economy of motion that had once made him legendary. The ship's status display painted a grim picture. Multiple hull breaches on Deck 7, primary power grid destabilized, and most ominously, life support failures in the diplomatic quarters. Emergency bulkheads had sealed the affected sections, trapping anyone inside with rapidly diminishing air supplies. "All passengers, please remain calm and proceed to designated emergency stations," the ship's AI announced with mechanical composure. "This is not a drill. Emergency services are responding to a catastrophic system failure in Section 7. System failure." Marcus had seen enough sabotage to recognize the euphemism. Someone had planted explosives with surgical precision, targeting the ship's most vulnerable systems and ensuring maximum damage with minimal effort. The kind of operation that required detailed knowledge of the vessel's design and access to restricted areas. He made his way toward the emergency response center, noting how other passengers reacted to the crisis. The Karathi delegation moved with efficient purpose toward their assigned stations. The Etherian diplomats seemed confused and frightened, their translucent forms flickering with distress. But the Veltar group was nowhere to be seen. The emergency center was chaos. Ship's officers shouted orders while damage control teams prepared to enter the affected sections. Captain Vexala, a four-armed Therian with decades of spacefaring experience, stood at the center of the storm trying to coordinate multiple rescue operations simultaneously. "Captain," Marcus said, approaching the command station with quiet authority. Vexala looked up, her vertical pupils dilating with stress. "Mr. Chen, You should be at your emergency station. This area is restricted to essential personnel only. I have medical training, Marcus lied smoothly. If there are casualties, I might be able to help. It wasn't entirely a lie. Special operations training included extensive combat medical instruction, though Marcus doubted the captain would appreciate the distinction. Vexala studied his face for a moment, then nodded curtly. Deck 7, Section 12. The Etherian diplomatic suite is sealed off, and we're reading 4 life signs but can't establish communication. The rescue team estimates 20 minutes before they can cut through the emergency barriers. How long do the Etherians have? In normal atmosphere, about 30 minutes. But their atmospheric requirements are different from baseline humans. They need a specific mixture of noble gases that the emergency systems can't provide. They might have 10 minutes, maybe less. Marcus nodded grimly. What about the cause of the explosion? Unknown. Engineering is investigating, but their priority is damage control. Vexela's expression darkened. Preliminary scans suggest the blast originated from inside the diplomatic section, which should have been impossible. Those areas have the highest security rating on the ship. Inside job. Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Captain, I need to ask a sensitive question. Where is Commander Zethkar's delegation right now? Vexala's pupils contracted to vertical slits. They volunteered to help with rescue operations. Why? Because I think you're going to find they're responsible for this. Marcus kept his voice level and professional. I strongly recommend you have security place them in protective custody immediately. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Chen. Do you have evidence? Not yet, but I will. Marcus turned toward the exit. Keep trying to reach the Etherians. I'm going to attempt an alternative rescue approach. Mr. Chen, wait. The area is sealed for... But Marcus was already gone. Moving through the ship's corridors with purposeful determination, he had work to do, and the Reaper was about to come out of retirement. The ship's service tunnels were cramped and poorly lit, designed for maintenance access rather than human passage. Marcus crawled through the narrow spaces with practiced efficiency, following schematics he had memorized during his first day aboard. The route to Deck 7 was circuitous but would bypass the emergency barriers that had the rescue team stymied. As he moved, his mind raced through tactical possibilities. If Zethkar was running a terrorist operation, the explosion was likely just the opening move. Killing the Etherian delegation would destabilize the peace accords, potentially triggering a return to open warfare between the Coalition and the Veltar Empire. But to accomplish that, the perpetrators would need to ensure no survivors, no witnesses, and no evidence pointing back to them, which meant they would want to be present when the rescue teams breached the diplomatic suite, positioned to eliminate any Etherians who might have survived the initial attack. Marcus reached the service junction above Section 12 and carefully removed the access panel. Below him, he could hear the sound of cutting torches and shouted orders as the official rescue team worked to break through the emergency barriers. But there was something else, the soft whisper of movement in the sealed section beyond. Someone was already inside with the Etherians. Marcus dropped silently into the corridor and approached the diplomatic suite with the predatory grace that had once struck fear into enemy forces across a dozen star systems. The emergency barrier showed signs of careful manipulation. Someone, with technical expertise, had created a small access point, large enough for a person to crawl through but small enough to escape casual notice. He squeezed through the gap and found himself in a scene from a nightmare. The Etherian delegation lay scattered across the suite's main chamber, their normally luminous forms dim and flickering. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the air tasted of ozone and fear. Standing over the fallen diplomats was Sub-Commander Velthara, a plasma cutter in her hands and murder in her yellow eyes. She looked up as Marcus emerged from the barrier, and for a moment they simply stared at each other across the destroyed room. Then Velthara smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "The Reaper," she said with satisfaction. "How convenient. Now I can eliminate 2 problems with 1 operation." Marcus said nothing. He simply assessed the tactical situation with professional detachment, 4 exits, multiple pieces of debris that could serve as weapons or cover, and an opponent with superior strength and natural weapons but questionable training in close-quarters combat. The transformation that came over him was subtle but complete. The mild-mannered cultural attaché vanished, replaced by something that moved like controlled violence given form. When Marcus spoke, his voice carried the absolute certainty of death itself. "You have 30 seconds to surrender before I kill you." Velthara's laugh was harsh and confident. Bold words from a soft human. "Let me show you why your species will never be more than servants to their betters." She lunged forward with the plasma cutter raised, expecting to end the fight quickly. Instead, she found herself grasping empty air as Marcus flowed around her attack like water, his movements too fast and fluid to track. Before she could react, iron-hard fingers struck precise nerve clusters along her arms, and the plasma cutter clattered to the floor. The Reaper had returned to work. The fight lasted exactly 47 seconds. Velthara was a trained warrior with decades of combat experience, enhanced strength, natural weapons, and the advantage of reach. Under normal circumstances, she could have torn apart 3 humans without breaking stride. But these were not normal circumstances, and Marcus Chen was not a normal human. The Reaper moved like controlled lightning, every action calculated for maximum efficiency. When Velthara swung her claws in a wide arc designed to disembowel him, Marcus was already inside her guard, driving precise strikes into nerve clusters that temporarily paralyzed her limbs. When she tried to use her superior mass to pin him against the wall, he flowed around her like smoke, positioning himself for the killing blow, but he didn't take it. Instead, Marcus applied a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to Velthara's brain, without causing permanent damage. She struggled for a few seconds, her strength gradually fading until she collapsed unconscious to the deck. Throughout the entire engagement, Marcus never raised his voice, never showed anger or excitement. He simply did what was necessary with the cold professionalism that had made him legendary. The moment Velthara hit the floor, Marcus was already moving to assess the Etherian casualties. The translucent beings were barely conscious, their forms flickering weakly as their specialized metabolism struggled with the contaminated atmosphere. But they were alive, and that was what mattered. "Can you hear me?" Marcus asked the lead diplomat, a being called Luminara who served as the Coalition's chief negotiator for this sector. Her response came as a weak telepathic whisper directly into his mind. "The others, sabotage. Zethkar plans to blame humans for our deaths. How many others are involved?" 3, maybe 4 Veltar operatives, positioned throughout the ship. "Coordinated attack when rescue teams arrive." Marcus nodded grimly. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Kill the Etherian delegation, frame the humans for the attack, and use the resulting outrage to restart the war. The fact that Marcus himself was aboard the ship was probably seen as an additional bonus. Eliminating the Reaper would remove one of the Coalition's most effective assets while simultaneously providing a convenient scapegoat. "Stay conscious if you can," Marcus told Luminara. "Help is coming." He moved to the emergency barrier and squeezed back through the access gap that Velthara had created. The official rescue team was still working to cut through the primary barrier, their torches throwing showers of sparks in the corridor. Marcus approached the team leader, a competent-looking Karathi engineer named Tekvar. "How much longer?" Marcus asked. "Maybe 10 minutes, Tekvar replied without looking up from his work. "The barrier is reinforced titanium steel composite. Very tough. The Etherians don't have 10 minutes. There's another way in, but we need to move fast." Marcus gestured toward the service tunnel he had used. "I've already confirmed they're alive, but their atmospheric requirements are critical." Tekvar studied Marcus with multifaceted eyes. "You were inside? How?" "Emergency access panel in the service tunnel. The opening is small, but a rescue team could squeeze through with portable life support equipment." Marcus paused, then added the crucial detail. "But we need security backup." "The explosion wasn't an accident." "What do you mean?" "I mean there's an unconscious Veltar terrorist inside with a plasma cutter, and she's not the only one." Marcus kept his voice calm and professional. "This is a coordinated attack designed to kill the Etherian delegation and restart the war." Tekvar's chitin plating darkened with alarm. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. Contact Captain Vexala immediately and tell her to arrest Commander Zethkar and his entire delegation. They're all involved. Marcus was already moving toward the service tunnel. I'm going back inside to secure the scene until proper backup arrives. Wait. You can't. But Marcus was already climbing back into the tunnel, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years navigating hostile territory. He emerged in the diplomatic suite to find Velthara exactly where he had left her, unconscious but breathing steadily. The Etherians were holding on, their life signs stable for the moment. Marcus settled into a defensive position covering the main entrance and activated his personal communicator. Time to drop the cultural attaché cover completely. Priority override 77 Alpha, he said into the device. This is Agent Chen requesting immediate support for terrorist interdiction. Multiple hostiles. Imminent threat to coalition diplomatic assets. The response came instantly in Admiral Rodriguez's crisp voice. Confirmed, Agent Chen, what do you need? Local security is compromised. I need a direct line to Captain Vexala, and authorization to take command of the situation. Marcus checked his chronometer. Time is critical. The terrorists are planning to strike when the rescue teams breach the barrier. Patching you through now. Full authority granted. Captain Vexala's voice crackled through the communicator moments later. Mr. Chen, Admiral Rodriguez says you have information about the explosion. Captain, this is Agent Marcus Chen, Coalition Special Operations. The explosion was sabotage carried out by Veltar extremists. Commander Zethkar is running the operation with at least 3 other operatives positioned throughout your ship. Marcus spoke with crisp military precision. They plan to eliminate the rescue teams and blame humans for the Etherian deaths. You need to arrest the entire Veltar delegation immediately. There was a moment of shocked silence. Agent Chen, are you saying you're... I'm saying that Subcommander Velthara is currently unconscious at my feet with a plasma cutter she was using to murder diplomatic personnel. The Etherians are alive but critical, and we have maybe 5 minutes before her backup arrives to finish the job. Marcus could hear orders being shouted in the background as Vexala processed the information. Security teams are moving to apprehend the Veltar delegation now. What's your status? Secure for the moment, but that's about to change. I'm reading movement in the corridor outside. Looks like the cavalry is arriving. Through the damaged suite's door, Marcus could see shapes moving in the emergency lighting. 3 figures in maintenance coveralls, carrying what looked like rescue equipment but moved with the purposeful coordination of military operators. They approached the barrier, where the legitimate rescue team was still working, and Marcus realized with cold certainty that they were about to eliminate the witnesses. Captain, Marcus said into his communicator, I need you to pull your rescue team back from the barrier immediately. They're about to walk into an ambush. What? We can't abandon the rescue. The rescue is complete. I'm already inside with the survivors. Your people are about to become casualties if you don't move them now. Marcus could hear Vexala giving urgent orders, but he wasn't sure they would reach the rescue team in time. The 3 terrorists had reached the barrier and were speaking to Tekvar, probably claiming to be additional rescue personnel. In moments, they would eliminate the engineering team and take control of the breach point, unless someone stopped them first. Marcus checked his improvised weapons, a piece of metal, debris that would serve as a throwing knife, a broken chair leg that could function as a club, and his own hands, which had been registered with Coalition Command as lethal weapons. It would have to be enough. He moved toward the access gap, preparing to engage 3 armed terrorists in a confined space while protecting wounded diplomats and maintaining his cover story. Just another day in the life of the Reaper. Outside the barrier, he could hear the sound of weapons being charged and orders being given in the harsh consonants of military Veltar. The real rescue was about to begin. The attack came exactly as Marcus had predicted. The 3 terrorists eliminated Tekvar and his rescue team with ruthless efficiency, using electromagnetic pulse weapons that disrupted their protective gear and left them helpless. Within seconds, the corridor outside the diplomatic suite was under terrorist control, with the legitimate rescue personnel either dead or incapacitated. Marcus listened to the brief. Violent engagement through the barrier while calculating angles, distances, and tactical options. 3 armed hostiles, unknown weapons loadout. Confined space with limited cover. Under normal circumstances, a rational person would wait for backup. But the Etherians were dying, and backup might not arrive in time. The Reaper had never been particularly rational. Human. A voice called through the barrier in accented standard. "We know you are inside. Come out slowly and you will not be harmed. We are here to rescue the diplomatic personnel." Marcus smiled grimly at the obvious lie. If they were legitimate rescuers, they would have identified themselves properly and coordinated with the ship's crew. Instead, they had killed the real rescue team and were now trying to lure him into the open. "The Etherians need immediate medical attention," Marcus called back, modulating his voice to sound frightened and desperate. "Please hurry, I think some of them are dying. We are coming through now. Stay back from the entrance." Marcus heard the distinctive whine of cutting tools as the terrorists began enlarging Velthara's access gap. They were being cautious, which gave him a few precious minutes to prepare. He positioned himself in the shadows beside the entrance, a piece of twisted metal balanced in his right hand. When the first terrorist squeezed through the gap, Marcus would have exactly one chance to gain the initiative. The cutting stopped. Hushed voices conferred in rapid Veltar, discussing entry tactics and contingencies. These were professionals, not fanatics, which made them more dangerous but also more predictable. They would enter sequentially to avoid crowding, with the lead operative providing cover while the others moved to secure positions. Standard operating procedure. Marcus had written similar protocols himself. The first terrorist came through the gap with his weapon raised, scanning for targets with methodical precision. He was halfway into the room when Marcus's improvised knife took him in the throat, severing his vocal cords and preventing any warning to his companions. The Veltar dropped silently, his weapon clattering across the deck. "Velkoth, report," came a voice from the corridor. "What is your status?" Marcus grabbed the fallen weapon, a military-grade pulse rifle with a full charge pack, and positioned himself beside the entrance. When the second terrorist squeezed through to investigate his partner's silence, Marcus put 3 shots center mass before the alien could react. The Veltar crumpled without making a sound. 2 down, 1 to go. But the third terrorist had learned from his companion's fate. Instead of entering the room, he began talking. "Very impressive, Reaper," the voice said with grudging respect. "I am Korthval, assault specialist with the Veltar Liberation Front. I know who you are and what you are capable of." Marcus said nothing, using the silence to reposition himself and assess the tactical situation. The terrorist had knowledge of his identity, which suggested this operation was specifically designed to eliminate him along with the Etherian delegation. The targeting wasn't random. Someone had known he would be aboard this ship. "You are wondering how we found you," Korthval continued conversationally. "The answer is simple. Commander Zethkar reported your presence to our organization yesterday. A perfect opportunity to remove both the Coalition's most effective operative and their primary diplomatic negotiators." Still, Marcus remained silent, moving carefully through the damaged suite while keeping the entrance covered. The Etherians were still alive but fading fast. He needed to end this quickly. "I have an explosive device," Korthval announced, "powerful enough to breach the ship's hull and kill everyone in this section. If you do not surrender in 30 seconds, I will detonate it. The Etherians will die anyway, but at least their deaths will appear accidental." Marcus considered his options. The terrorist was probably bluffing about the explosive. Killing the Etherians was the primary objective, but making their deaths look accidental required more finesse than a hull breach. But he couldn't take the risk of being wrong. "Time for a different approach, Korthval," Marcus said, allowing his voice to carry through the room. "That's an interesting name. Old Veltar, meaning honor in battle. Your family must be proud of their son's work." A pause. "What are you talking about, human?" "I'm talking about the fact that your name is already in Coalition intelligence files. Korthval of the Outer Rim Territories, wanted for 17 counts of terrorist activity, suspected of involvement in the Centauri station bombing." Marcus kept his voice conversational, almost friendly. "Did you think we didn't know who we were dealing with?" "You're lying, am I? Tell me, Korthval, what do you think happens to terrorist operatives when their identities are confirmed, especially ones who murder Coalition diplomats?" Marcus began moving toward the entrance, using the conversation to mask his approach. "Your family, your clan, your entire bloodline becomes a target for Coalition justice. Is that really the legacy you want to leave?" "The Liberation Front protects its own," Korthval said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Does it? Then why are you here alone? Why didn't they send backup? Why are you talking to me instead of completing your mission?" Marcus reached the barrier and carefully peered through the gap. The terrorist was positioned against the far wall, a small device in his hands that could indeed be an explosive. I think you're beginning to realize that this operation was never about liberation. It was about elimination, and not just of the Etherians. The silence stretched for long seconds. Marcus could almost hear the wheels turning in Korthval's mind as the terrorist began to understand the true nature of his situation. Zethkar sent you here to die, Marcus continued relentlessly. Think about it. Why would the Liberation Front need to eliminate the Reaper? I'm officially retired, supposedly harmless, unless someone wanted to make sure I couldn't interfere with their real plans. What real plans? The ones that involve framing the entire Veltar species for this attack. The ones that require no witnesses, no survivors, no inconvenient evidence. Marcus's voice grew deadly quiet. You're not a liberator, Korthval. You're a dupe, and when this is over, Zethkar will make sure you're blamed for everything. Through the gap, Marcus could see the terrorist's posture change as doubt and suspicion replaced confidence. The device in his hands lowered slightly as Korthval processed the implications of what he was hearing. You're lying, he repeated, but with less conviction. Am I? Then why hasn't your backup arrived? Why haven't you heard from your command structure? Why are you completely alone on a ship full of coalition forces? Marcus prepared to move. Face it, Korthval. You've been betrayed. The moment of doubt was all Marcus needed. He flowed through the gap like liquid death, covering the distance to the terrorist before Korthval could react. The device flew from nerveless fingers as Marcus applied precise pressure to nerve clusters, dropping the Veltar to the deck in seconds. 3 down. Mission accomplished. Marcus secured the device, which was indeed a sophisticated explosive, and checked the corridor for additional threats. Finding none, he activated his communicator again. Captain Vexala, this is Agent Chen. The immediate threat has been neutralized. I need medical teams for the Etherian delegation and detention facilities for 3 terrorist operatives. And Captain, I strongly recommend you place Commander Zethkar in maximum security isolation. He's the key to this entire operation. Understood, Agent Chen. Medical teams are en route. The captain's voice carried new respect. And Agent? Thank you. Marcus looked back at the unconscious Velthera and considered the implications of what had just happened. This operation had been too sophisticated, too well planned to be a simple terrorist attack. Someone with access to coalition intelligence had orchestrated this entire scenario, using extremist cells as expendable assets while maintaining plausible deniability. The question was, who? As medical teams arrived to treat the Etherians and security forces secured the terrorists, Marcus began planning his next moves. The Reaper's work was far from over. The interrogation of Commander Zethkar took place in the ship's security center, a sterile room lined with sensor-dampening materials and equipped with the most advanced truth verification technology the Coalition could provide. Marcus sat across from the Veltar commander, no longer bothering to maintain his cultural attaché persona. The mild-mannered diplomat was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more patient. Zethkar's forearms were secured in electromagnetic restraints, but his yellow eyes still blazed with defiant pride. Even captured, even facing inevitable execution for terrorism and multiple counts of murder, the commander maintained his warrior's bearing. It would have been admirable under different circumstances. You played your role well, Marcus said conversationally, reviewing the data pad containing Zethkar's service record. Decorated war hero, respected commander. Perfect cover for extremist activities. How long have you been working with the Liberation Front? I will tell you nothing, human. Zethkar's voice carried the cold dignity of someone who had already accepted death. The Liberation Front fights for Veltar independence from coalition oppression. Our cause is just, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Just, that's an interesting word choice. Was it just when your operatives murdered 4 Karathi engineers who were trying to save lives? Was it just when you planned to frame humanity for the deaths of innocent diplomats? Casualties are inevitable in war. Zethkar's mandibles clicked dismissively. Your species understands this better than most. How many worlds have humans conquered? How many civilizations have you destroyed in the name of progress? Fair point, Marcus acknowledged. Humans have a bloody history. But we're not talking about ancient conquests or territorial expansion. We're talking about you murdering people to restart a war that both sides have agreed to end. The interrogation continued for over an hour, with Marcus methodically working through every aspect of the terrorist operation. Zethkar's responses painted a picture of a sophisticated organization with cells throughout the coalition, funded by unknown sources and directed by someone with access to classified intelligence. But the more Marcus learned, the more convinced he became that something was wrong with the entire scenario. "Tell me about your recruitment," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "Who first approached you about joining the Liberation Front?" Zethkar's eyes narrowed. "Why would I tell you that?" "Because I don't think you know," Marcus replied quietly. "I think you were recruited through intermediaries, given just enough information to make you feel important while keeping you isolated from the real leadership. Classic compartmentalization. You know nothing about our organization. Know that 4 experienced operatives just threw their lives away on a mission that was doomed from the start." Marcus pulled up holographic displays, showing the ship's internal sensor logs. "I know that your people were given faulty intelligence about coalition security protocols, outdated information about emergency response procedures, and completely wrong data about my own capabilities." Zethkar studied the displays with growing unease. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that your Liberation Front is a fiction. A convenient cover story for someone who needed expendable assets to carry out a very specific mission." Marcus highlighted portions of the sensor data. "Look at this. Your operatives' equipment was top of the line, but their tactical planning was amateur. Their weapons were coalition military grade, but their communication protocols were full of security holes. Everything about this operation screams professional backing with deliberate weaknesses built in." The Veltar commander's composure finally cracked slightly. "That's impossible. The Liberation Front has been active for years. We've carried out dozens of operations, have you? Or have you been told about dozens of operations that may or may not have actually happened?" Marcus activated another display showing coalition intelligence reports. "According to our files, the Liberation Front has claimed responsibility for 17 attacks over the past 3 years. But when we investigate the actual incidents, the evidence is always circumstantial. No confirmed operatives captured, no direct evidence of Veltar involvement, just anonymous communications claiming credit." Zethkar stared at the data with growing horror as the implications became clear. "You're saying we've been manipulated?" "I'm saying you've been used. Someone created the Liberation Front as a false flag operation, recruiting genuine Veltar extremists to provide credibility, while using them as expendable assets." Marcus leaned forward, his voice growing deadly serious. "The question is, who benefits from restarting the war between the Coalition and the Veltar Empire?" Before Zethkar could answer, Captain Vexala's voice crackled through the intercom. "Agent Chen, please report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." Marcus secured the interrogation data and made his way to the ship's command center, his mind racing through possibilities. The terrorist operation had been too sophisticated for amateur extremists, but too flawed for professional intelligence operatives. Someone had wanted it to fail, but not before accomplishing specific objectives. The bridge was a hive of urgent activity when Marcus arrived. Captain Vexala stood at the central command station, her forearms coordinating multiple information streams while her officers worked at their stations with focused intensity. "Agent Chen," Vexala said without preamble, "we've been monitoring emergency frequencies since the attack. 10 minutes ago, we intercepted a priority transmission to Veltar Military Command, claiming that human operatives have massacred a Veltar diplomatic delegation aboard our ship." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What's the source of the transmission?" "Unknown. The signal was heavily encrypted and routed through multiple relay stations, but it contained detailed information about our passenger manifest, our route, and specific claims about Coalition Special Forces conducting false flag operations." Vexala's expression was grim. "Agent Chen, according to this transmission, you personally executed Commander Zethkar and his entire delegation after torturing them for information." The pieces finally clicked into place. The terrorist operation hadn't been designed to kill the Etherian delegation. It had been designed to create plausible justification for eliminating the Veltar delegates while making it look like coalition treachery. Marcus's presence on the ship wasn't coincidental. It was essential to the plan. "Captain, I need immediate communication with Admiral Rodriguez," Marcus said urgently. This entire operation has been a setup from the beginning. What do you mean? Someone knew I would be on this ship. They arranged for Zethkar to be here, provided him with just enough information to make him suspicious of my identity, then used that suspicion to justify recruiting him into their false liberation front. Marcus was already moving toward the communication station. When the attack failed, they activated their backup plan, claimed that I killed the Veltar delegation myself. Admiral Rodriguez's image appeared on the main display within minutes, her expression grave. Agent Chen, we've been monitoring the situation. The Veltar Empire has formally accused the coalition of conducting terrorist operations against their citizens. Admiral, we need to trace that transmission. Whoever sent it has access to classified intelligence about my mission, this ship's passenger manifest, and detailed knowledge of coalition special operations protocols. Marcus spoke with urgent precision. This was never about extremist cells or diplomatic assassinations. This is someone trying to restart the war by making both sides believe they've been betrayed. I'm running analysis on the transmission now, Rodriguez replied. Initial results suggest the signal originated from within coalition space, possibly from a government facility with access to military communication networks. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Someone within the coalition government, someone with access to the highest levels of classified information, was working to destroy the peace accords, the Liberation Front, the terrorist attack, even his own presence on the ship. Everything had been orchestrated by a traitor with the resources of an entire government at their disposal. Admiral, Marcus said quietly, I think we have a bigger problem than terrorist cells. Agreed. Agent Chen, I'm authorizing you to take whatever action necessary to identify and neutralize this threat. The peace accords are hanging by a thread, and if we don't find proof of this conspiracy soon, we're going to be back at war within the week. Marcus nodded grimly. The Reaper had been recalled to active duty, and this time the enemy wasn't foreign extremists or alien warriors. This time, he was hunting someone much more dangerous, a traitor who commanded resources that made battlefield opponents look like amateurs. The real mission was just beginning. As he prepared to leave the bridge, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in one of the displays. The mild-mannered cultural attaché was completely gone now, replaced by something harder and infinitely more lethal. He had tried to retire, tried to leave the killing behind and find peace in diplomatic service. But peace, it seemed, required someone willing to fight for it. The Reaper was back, and somewhere in the vast expanse of coalition space, a traitor was about to discover exactly why that name had once struck fear into the hearts of enemies across a dozen star systems. The hunt was on.